The year was 315 BC, and Antigonus stood as one of the most dominant figures across Eurasia. Emerging victorious from the Second War of the Diadochi, he now reigned over a vast domain, stretching from Bithynia to Bactria. However, in Macedonia and Thrace, his former allies, Cassander and Lysimachus, viewed his growing power with suspicion. Their concerns led them to engage in secret negotiations with Ptolemy in Egypt, with the possibility of Alexander's empire being reunited once more. Antigonus focused on strengthening his grip over the eastern provinces. In 314 BC, he executed Paethon, suspecting him of amassing too much influence, and annexed Media into his expanding realm. Continuing his advance southward, he captured the treasuries of Susa before leading his forces into Babylon. Upon his arrival, he was initially received with warmth by Seleucus, the region's governor. However, tensions soon escalated between the two, forcing Seleucus to flee to Egypt, where he later joined Ptolemy. Though Antigonus appeared to have secured his authority on the surface, many of the satraps remained unwilling to submit to his rule over Asia. In response, a powerful coalition formed in 314 BC, consisting of Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. The coalition presented Antigonus with an ultimatum, demanding that he redistribute Babylon's treasury wealth and disband his army. Complying with these terms would have effectively led to a fresh division of Alexander's empire. Lysimachus sought control over Hellespontine Phrygia, Cassander desired Cappadocia and Lycia, Seleucus demanded the return of Babylon, and Ptolemy claimed Syria. Justifying their demands, they cited their alliance against Eumenes, arguing they deserved a fairer share. Predictably, Antigonus outright rejected these terms, responding with a declaration of war through messengers. Thus, in 314 BC, conflict erupted once again. Despite his enemies taking the diplomatic initiative, it was Antigonus who struck first, targeting the Near Eastern territories under Ptolemy's control. His actions violated the Triparadisos Agreement, a crucial pact for launching any campaigns into Asia Minor or Persia. As with previous wars, this one also commenced with political maneuvering stretching across continents. Antigonus launched a siege on Tyre, mirroring Alexander's famous assault decades earlier. However, Ptolemy's naval forces continuously supplied the city, prolonging the conflict. The campaign lasted over a year, culminating in the devastating fall of Tyre, granting Antigonus full control over Phoenicia and most of Syria. Meanwhile, Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus orchestrated a rebellion against Antigonus, led by Cassander, one of his own subordinates who ruled Ionia and parts of Asia Minor. To counter this new front, Antigonus dispatched his nephew Ptolemy to suppress Cassander's uprising. At the same time, he issued promises of autonomy to the Greek polis, aiming to sway them against his opponents. Not to be outmaneuvered, Ptolemy responded by making his own pledge of security to the Greek city-states, hoping to undermine Antigonus's influence. Cassander, having expanded his domain into Lydia and parts of Cappadocia, gained significant backing from the coalition as the war intensified. Ptolemy's strategy focused on severing Cassander's access to Lysimachus and Cassander, ensuring they could not reinforce him by land. Executing this plan effectively, the young general successfully reclaimed the entirety of Cappadocia. He then advanced into Bithynia before turning south to threaten Caria, where he secured a decisive victory over Eupolemus, a commander loyal to Cassander. Despite his success in isolating Cassander and cutting him off from his allies, Ptolemy lacked the manpower and supplies to launch a sustained offensive. As a result, He dismissed his troops to winter quarters. Cassander, struggling to maintain control, sought negotiations. The freedom declarations had sparked revolts across the Peloponnese, fueled by Polyperchon. Meanwhile, Ptolemy continued to provide naval assistance. However, the Phoenicians had built a formidable fleet, allowing Antigonus to achieve naval supremacy in the Aegean. Seizing the opportunity, Antigonus withdrew his main army from Syria and marched against Cassander, entrusting the defense of the Levant to his eldest son, Demetrius. Alongside Demetrius were Python of Agenor and Nearchos, Alexander's former admiral. Upon reaching Asia Minor, Antigonus waged a successful campaign against Cassander, ultimately forcing him into a peace agreement. As terms of the treaty, Cassander was compelled to surrender his army, cede control of Caria, and offer up his own brother as a hostage. Meanwhile, Ptolemy mustered his Egyptian and Macedonian forces, advancing through the Sinai Peninsula toward Gaza. Demetrius, despite being advised against facing such seasoned generals, was determined to protect his father's newly acquired territories. Without hesitation, he led his forces through Syria and Judea, preparing for a decisive confrontation in Gaza. The battle unfolded in a field situated between the Besor River and Gaza itself. Commanding a significant force, Ptolemy and Seleucus led 18,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry. Facing them, Demetrius had 12,500 infantry, 4,400 cavalry, and 43 war elephants. The battlefield deployment was as follows. The Antigonid left flank was guarded by 3,000 cavalry, commanded by Demetrius and his advisors. In front of them stood 30 Indian elephants, flanked by 1,500 light infantry armed with bows. In the center of the line, an 11,000-strong phalanx was positioned. The remaining 13 elephants were arrayed at the front. On the right flank, the remaining 1,500 cavalry were stationed. Initially, Ptolemy and Seleucus had intended to place their cavalry on their left flank, but upon observing the enemy's arrangement, they adjusted their tactics, placing 3,000 cavalry on their right. To counter the threat of an elephant charge, Ptolemy had his engineers lay metal spikes across the field, with javelin throwers positioned nearby. The center was packed with 18,000 infantrymen, and about 1,000 cavalry was stationed on the left flank. The battle began with Demetrius charging forward at the head of his cavalry in a swift, lightning-like assault. In response, Seleucus and Ptolemy sent their cavalry to meet the charge head-on. This left Demetrius's right wing exposed, giving Seleucus and Ptolemy the opportunity to outflank the inexperienced Demetrius. Cavalry battle raged for an extended period, with many brave soldiers falling, but it ended with no clear victor. At this point, Demetrius ordered his elephants to charge in an attempt to overwhelm the enemy. The majestic creatures advanced, but their momentum was soon halted by Ptolemy's light cavalry, which unleashed a barrage of javelins and arrows upon the elephants. The elephant handlers fought valiantly against this onslaught, but they were ultimately thwarted by the metal spikes on the battlefield. In the end, almost all the elephants were either killed or captured, and their handlers perished as well. Seeing this catastrophic loss, the morale of the Antigonid forces plummeted, and chaos ensued. Many soldiers fled back toward Gaza, and despite Demetrius's desperate attempts to rally them, the retreat turned into a disorganized rout. Demetrius eventually ordered his troops to pull back, but the confusion within the ranks made it impossible to withdraw in an orderly fashion. As a result, Ptolemy and Seleucus encircled the remaining Antigonid forces, trapping them and capturing over 8,000 soldiers, while the rest were killed. Demetrius, having lost his honor, managed to escape the field, returning to Phoenicia. After his defeat, Demetrius retreated northward to Tripolis, where he began rebuilding his army. He also sent a report to his father, who had just concluded his campaign in Caria, urging him to send reinforcements. Meanwhile, Seleucus convinced Ptolemy to release him from service and grant him an army of 1,000 troops. With this force, Seleucus aimed to retake his former province of Babylonia, which had been left without a governor following the death of Paethon in battle. Ptolemy continued his pursuit of Demetrius, advancing as far north as Sidon. However, he soon received word that Antigonus was returning from Asia Minor with his main army, forcing Ptolemy to withdraw from Syria. Antigonus returned to Coele-Syria with an army of 80,000 men and swiftly reclaimed the Phoenician coastline. In the east, Seleucus had been steadily recruiting soldiers on his way to Babylon, amassing a force of around 3,000 troops. Upon finally reaching Babylon, he was warmly welcomed into the city and quickly recognized as the new ruler. He encountered little resistance, save for Paethon's former commander, Diphilus, who had barricaded himself and other Antigonid supporters inside the city's fortress. However, Seleucus swiftly laid siege to the fortress, successfully reoccupying Babylon. Afterward, he freed friends who had been imprisoned there and began organizing his government, marking the traditional beginning of the Seleucid Empire. Antigonus, aware of the impending challenges in the east, initiated negotiations with Cassander and Lysimachus. Meanwhile, his satraps, Nicanor of Media and Euagoras of Aria, assembled 17,000 troops and began moving toward him. Buoyed by his victory in Babylon, Seleucus gathered 3,000 infantry and 400 cavalry, advancing into the marshes of the Tigris to intercept the two satraps before they could unite with Antigonus. When Nicanor and Euagoras arrived at the banks of the Tigris, they were unaware that Seleucus was still nearby. He ordered his men to set up camp for the night, waiting until darkness fell. Under the cover of night, Seleucus attacked Nicanor's poorly defended stockade, launching a massacre. In the chaos, Euagoras was killed, prompting the Persian soldiers under his command to switch allegiances. Nicanor, with only a few remaining allies, fled, leaving Seleucus in control of Media and Elam. As turmoil continued in the east, Antigonus was preoccupied with diplomatic negotiations. Ptolemy joined the discussions with the other Diadochi, resulting in the formation of the Peace of the Dynasts. According to the terms of the treaty, Cassander received Macedonia and Thessaly, along with the right to garrison Greek cities, which were now considered independent by all parties. Lysimachus retained control of Thrace, while Ptolemy solidified his hold over Cyprus and Egypt. Antigonus, meanwhile, retained control of the rest, with his stronghold in Phoenicia, Asia Minor, and Syria. It was also agreed that Alexander IV, son of Roxana and Alexander III, would take the throne once he came of age. However, fearing that the son of the great conqueror would become a threat to his own rule, Cassander secretly ordered his assassination and had his body concealed. Thus, the last of the Argead dynasty, the son of Alexander and grandson of Philip, was lost to history. Roxana, too, was killed. Cassander kept these deaths secret, claiming to rule as a regent for Alexander's bloodline, rather than openly as a usurper. One key figure was notably excluded from the Peace of the Dynasts: Seleucus, who had now assumed the title of Nicator, or the Victorious. He had taken control of Aria and Persia, with only Sogdiana and Bactria left outside his reach. Though the Third War of the Diadochi had come to an end, the balance of power between the former generals of Alexander remained highly volatile. Antigonus, determined to conquer the East once again, began preparing to retake Babylon, while Seleucus spread rumors that Alexander himself had appeared to him in a dream, declaring him king. The tension between the two was palpable, and with sabers rattling, war seemed inevitable once more.